Hello and welcome to the Lend Hoping Nothing podcast. I'm Michael Humphreys. I'm happy to be talking to you today. This is episode 29, and today I want to talk about Aristotle's politics and his brief comments on usury and the context behind it. So, a day or so ago, there was some tweets that came out by I've seen him around Twitter, and I think I was following him at one point, but uh, his last name's McIntyre, and his first name is, I think, Oren or Aaron, or I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, but he essentially just posted a screenshot or a photo of Aristotle's very just brief comment about usury that we find in the politics. And this caused apparently quite a storm as people were commenting on it. And the post, Oren McIntyre, the post as of now has over 300 comments, 1,500 retweets, over 8,000 likes, and so forth. And so I read some of the replies, and it just occurred to me. So there's this meme that I really like, which is like say something without saying it, and usually it's a way of like say you don't know something without saying that you don't know, and this was this is like the quintessential example of that in many of these replies, where seemingly they they comment about how terrible Aristotle is and how he doesn't know anything, and his economics are nonsense, and so forth, which indicates that they've never actually read what Aristotle is saying in the Politics. And so and it's a common reading of Aristotle, unfortunately. I'll just briefly kind of read the screenshot. There are two sorts of wealth getting, as I have said. One is a part of household management, the other is retail trade or commerce. The former necessary and honorable, while that which consists in exchange is justly censured. For it is unnatural and a mode by which men gain from one another. The most hated sort, and with the greatest reason, is usury, which makes a gain out of money itself, and not from the natural object of it. For money was intended to be used in exchange, but not to increase at interest. And this term interest, which means the birth of money from money, is applied to the breeding of money because the offspring resembles the parent. Wherefore, of all the modes of getting wealth, this is the most unnatural. And so the sort of modern commentary on this is that Aristotle believes that usury is evil because money is sterile. And this interpretation of Aristotle will then be transposed on the entire scholastic tradition, unfortunately, revealing the ignorance of those who do so. And so there's a few things to just comment here as to why that is a bad reading. So the first thing is just that first of all, when people talk about the sterility of money or the fecundity of money, and insisting that it is in fact fertile, is they're engaging in a very silly equivocation, because quite obviously money is not fertile in the sort of sense that Aristotle's talking about here. It's sterile. Money doesn't produce more money. It's like a rock. It doesn't make more rocks. But so calling money fertile because you can exchange money for certain investment entitlements is just really it's really a lack of awareness of what's even going on in finance. Um, and so it's it's silly when I hear people say this, because um, it just has nothing at all to do. And when people deny that money is a medium of exchange, one commenter had said money is, Aristotle's real problem is that money is not a medium of exchange, it's a store of value. And it's like, okay, how do you get the value out of the money? You exchange it. Do you eat the money? No. What do you do with the money? What value is it storing? It's storing the ability to buy other things. Um, so, um, yeah. And the other thing, and so part of what's going on here is that when Aristotle's even talking about sterility, now he's talking about this in terms of the etymology of the Greek word tokos. Now, there was a symposium between W.D. Ross and some other kind of contemporary um, commenters and authors and thinkers about Aristotle in the 1920s. And um, what it came down to, it seems like they just exchanged letters, and then those letters were printed. And so one of the things that the authors, bring up about this is that it doesn't seem like the remark about the etymology is central to the argument here. And really it's more parenthetical. Though W.D. Ross, I think, goes in an incorrect direction with it. But, you have these commentators who, over 100 years ago already acknowledged that this is quite silly to read Aristotle this way, and people still do it. And in fact, I have this really interesting book, Aristotle's Economic Thought, which brings up this exact point, and he walks through what I'm going to walk through in a very similar way. I was really pleased when I read his discussion of it, because it lined up with mine for the most part. So so this idea of the sterility of money is and money breeding money is more parenthetical to the overall argument. And since I'm writing my thesis on Aquinas, Aquinas very similar as well, is he doesn't focus on this. Now, one of the interesting questions that they posed was who exactly was the first to in this symposium, who was the first to claim that usury is evil because money is sterile. And one of the earliest ones I've found, and this is kind of just tangential to the whole point, I guess, but who was it? Among the Greek fathers, I forget which one it was, but I think it was Gregory of Nyssa or Gregory of Nazianzen. Nazianzen? I don't know. You know me. Or I don't think it was Basil, but it was one of those Gregories among the Greek fathers, and he makes a remark about usury being evil because money is sterile. So I think that might be one of the earliest, though. As far as I can tell, like it's wholly unrecognized by the West, because they I think they come to it through Aristotle rather than the fathers, because it is something that does appear, but that's beside the point. So, other point I wanted to make about this was, so Aristotle calls retail trade or gain or commerce unnatural as well, even though in retail trade, money is being used for exchange. And so the issue that Aristotle has with usury seems to be that it's not being used for exchange, but in the retail trade it is, and yet he still says it's justly censured, unnatural, and a mode by which men gain from one another. And so those are the sort of things that he recognizes. And even before that, he talks about how this other form of wealth getting in household management is necessary and honorable. And that I think's the really driving point here. And that's where we'll kind of move to his discussion. So this is all taking place at the end of chapter 10 of book 1. And this is really the conclusion, the culmination of what came before in the prior 2 chapters. And so Aristotle's remarks here need to be taken within that context. And so getting to the context of it, so the beginning of book 1, Aristotle is trying to discuss, like, well, we need to understand the political science. And so we're going to start by looking at, like we do in the other sciences, look at the simplest case. So rather than starting at all of the complexity of the state, we're going to start at the level, we're going to kind of focus down, and we're going to look at the household, the individual family, which is part of the village, which is still familial, like cousins, but then goes to the city and the state as the most perfect community. So he says, okay, well, let's move down and look at the most basic situation, the easiest to understand, because as he says in the Metaphysics, a small error in the beginning produces a large error at the end. And the usury discussion, the usury commentary that goes on follows that exact line, although it's not a small error, and there's hardly a beginning. So he begins this, and he talks about the relations going on in the household, father and son, husband and wife, master and slave, and the whole issue of what he means by slavery, what's going on there, is probably worth its own discussion. But eventually, after this discussion, we get to this point where he says, well, like, we need to talk about property in general and the theory of property and get a grasp of this and the modes of wealth getting. And so what he focuses on is, okay, well, what we see animals doing is, well, they go out and they get things. And principally what they get is nourishment, food. But when he says nourishment there, I think he's speaking not only of food, but basically what's necessary for life. And broadly speaking there, the things that are necessary. It's focusing on these necessary things, because without that, there is no life, there is no household, etc., etc. And then he talks about how humans go about this. So there's, herders, there are hunters, there's raiders, there are fishermen, and then there are people who live off agriculture, which is the majority of people. And so he notices these parallels between the way that animals do things and the way we do things. And what he discusses there is he sees, okay, well, we go out into the natural world and we extract things from it by, killing animals, gathering plants for food, for clothing, and so forth. So this is very natural. It's very similar, parallel to what other animals are doing. And also it's natural in the sense that he sees these things of nature as for the sake of satisfying our needs. So we need to eat. They're for the sake of us. And so there's this naturalness that he establishes here at the beginning of chapter, or mid chapter 8. It's not a long chapter, but the beginning of his argument, where the naturalness is based in this, we're taking things from nature that satisfy our human needs, and that's kind of what makes it natural. And so then he then goes on and says this is a natural, it's necessary, it produces the sort of self-sufficiency which is required for the good life. And it's for all those things that are, necessary for living, but also useful to the community. So I think here not only of food and clothing, but shelter, writing implements and instruments and so forth. So, and these are all things that we take from nature. And this is just as true today, because even something as complex as, your iPhone that you're watching this on, or a computer, like all the bits and pieces, even the synthetic stuff, like the plastic, derives from some sort of natural origin. And it's been manipulated and so forth to have this particular form and function. But they're all things that were derived from nature for their utility and necessity. And so this is a completely accurate description, not only of ancient Greece, but of modern day. So then in chapter 9 he moves to the second form of wealth getting, which we hear about in chapter 10 again. But this second form is, in a sense, unnatural, or not by nature. And the issue that he raises here is, okay, well, property, because this is ultimately what we're discussing, has two uses. Well, you can use it for what it is by nature, or you can use it for selling. So the example he gives is shoes. So you can use shoes for wearing, which is what they are for as part of their nature, or you can use them to sell them. And selling them is still a use of the shoes as such. So it's not something different because it's being sold, but it's the shoes as such, because you're not selling, I don't know, rocks, something else. You're not selling something else. You're selling it as shoes because someone else needs something to wear, to put on their feet. And so he says it's a use of the thing as such. And so he then kind of moves and says, okay, well, we face the human condition that in the household, things are shared in common. Even when you get to the village, so broader familial relations, there's a mutual sharing of goods. But once you get to the larger community, the city, the polis, then you start having exchange. And so the first level and the simplest form of exchange is going to be, granting one sort of good for a different sort of good. So you need milk, I need chickens. I have an excess of milk and a deficiency of chickens. You have an excess of chickens and a deficiency of milk. And we engage in a trade. And he says, this is still natural. This is still at that, because we're still exchanging those things that we need that satisfy human wants. And it's still from nature, because it's still all of these things of nature. Now, we come to the next level, he says, when trade becomes, longer distances. And so, you're going to have a hard time transporting, milk from Greece to Egypt across land or sea, because it'll probably spoil in it. And so transporting these necessities becomes difficult. And so men among themselves agree to select one of the useful things as money in order to be able to engage in this long distance trade. And this is what we see today. We have coins and bills, and we've even gone beyond that, where money, the majority of what is used as money is bank deposits. And why do we do that? Well, we do that because it's a lot easier and quicker to exchange, electronically than having to even ship the coin and the bills here and there. And so you can exchange property entitlements electronically, essentially instantaneously from our perspective. Without having to move coins anywhere. And so it augments the advantages that we have, that Aristotle is already talking about. So it's introduced for the sake of, still supplying these needs, but it's something that arises not from nature but from convention. And so there's an artificiality to it. And what he sees to begin happen is, well, we've established this. And the thing to note here is, even at this level, this sort of trade is still a good thing because it's still supplying, our needs. But what happens is that people begin to try to seek the greatest profit that they can possibly. And then the issue that arises is that we have money is sought for its own sake because it's seen as the true wealth. Whereas he argues that true wealth is in those natural things that satisfy human needs. And the way that he demonstrates this is he considers the fable of Midas. So in the story of Midas, he obtains this ability that whatever he touches turns to gold. But the sort of absurdity of this is that from the perspective of coin, he's rich. He has, nearly unlimited gold. Whatever he touches becomes gold. It's endless now. He can have as much gold as he wants, but he starves to death because whenever he tries to eat something, it turns to gold. And so there's a sort of absurdity that Aristotle brings out in that, this isn't true wealth because it's absurd to say that the wealthy man starves to death. And so he brings out this point that, money is this sort of artificial wealth, and it doesn't actually satisfy our needs. But it's for the sake of obtaining those things that are that are that do satisfy our needs. And so he makes this distinction between natural and artificial wealth that Aquinas will also pick up. And so, but he notes this tendency of people to mistakenly think that money is the true wealth. And so then he'll go on and he'll talk about, well, what's the consequence of this when people treat money as the true wealth? Is that they seek it for its own sake. And so we seek an end, so something for its own sake. We seek an end as much as possible, but a means only insofar as it obtains the end. And the example he gives is medicine. So in medicine, the end is health, but the means is maybe medication or something of that kind. And so we try to be as healthy as possible. There's no limit to the health that we would like to have. We would like to be as healthy as there is possible to be. But we'll only take medication insofar as it makes us healthy. Like, we're not just going to, overdose on every medication, because then it's going to destroy our health and undermine the end that we're seeking. So we only use the end insofar as it obtains or we only use the means insofar as it obtains the end. So there's a limit to the means. Now, in the case of sort of the natural wealth, there's also a certain limit to the end, because we're seeking the necessary things to satisfy our needs, and we'll seek them to satisfy those needs. And we want our needs to be as satisfied as much as possible, just completely satisfied. But we'll only seek it insofar as it satisfies our needs. Like, we'll only eat as much as we need to. Like, eventually, if we keep eating, it's going to make us sick. And so the problem with having money as the end in itself is that you can keep getting more and more money. You can keep profiting. You can get more and more and more. There's no end to it. And in this sense, it has a certain irrationality to it, because you just keep going and going and try to, and he gives the example of people who seek life rather than the good life. So they'll seek to live as much as possible. And we can see this at times in our own society, where people will just try to make as much money as possible so that they can have every possible experience or the most experiences, have 100 TVs and travel everywhere in the world. And there's sort of avariceness about that, trying to, get all of these experiences. And even those who do try to live well, he talks about, I don't know if that's the best translation, but I don't know the Greek, so I can't say. So he talks about other people who are trying to live well, and they try to satisfy all their bodily desires and gratify themselves. It's the same thing. It's vicious, because you're seeking to just live and satisfy all these things, and so it's really it really kind of undermines virtue. But even worse than that, he goes on, is that it also perverts the virtues. So he gives the example of courage. And so rather than someone acting courageously to, confront some danger, the soldier who enters battle and confronts his fear of death in order to obtain victory, you just use it to make money. And so this is what we see. We see, stock traders and so forth who exhibit a sort of courage in the way, and daring in the way that they approach, these sort of financial risks. But it's a sort of perversion of the virtue, because it turns the virtue into nothing but for the sake of making money. And he goes on to talk about, the other arts that have an end, and how these skills are then just reduced to just seeking profit and money. And he gives the example of, generalship and medicine, where it's no longer you're seeking victory, you're seeking health, you're just seeking profit. And, again, this is something we see in our own world, where we're very suspicious of the pharmaceutical industry, because they're not acting for the sake of health anymore. They're acting for the sake of just generating more profits. And so there's this endless suspicion of like, well, do you really need to have prices that high? It really undermines the polis, it undermines society, it undermines the virtues. And so this is where he kind of brings it to a close on the this unnatural mode of wealth getting, where he sees this move where we're trying to obtain those things that are necessary, first from nature and by nature, but then engaging in exchange with one another for those necessary things, and then engaging in exchange for money in order to obtain other necessary things. And this sort of progressive move, which eventually sees that money is the end, as the true wealth and an end in itself, sort of becomes this irrationality that undermines the virtues. It leads people to seek to live rather than live well, and it undermines the city. And so there's this whole problem that he's drawing out, which is a problem we live with just as much today. So, and so this unnaturalness of it is that, this exchange is artificial, because it comes out of convention. It comes out of the ingenuity and invention of man to create money and then engage in exchange. I think he does. There is an implicit distinction there between that Aquinas talks about in trading, between trading for the sake of necessary things. So I'm seeking a profit in order for some necessity or good end, whereas commerce, which is for this, it's almost like an excess. It's the way that Aristotle is talking about it, but I don't know the Greek, so I can't really confirm it, and so I'm relying on these translations. But it seems like there's a distinction that he allows there between, seeking a profit for the sake of necessary things, which Aquinas will admit is licit, whereas seeking a profit for its own sake, which has all of these other consequences. And so then we turn to chapter 10, and before that passage I read at the beginning of the episode, there's actually 2 paragraphs where he kind of says, "Oh yeah, and by the way, this helps discuss the ultimate solution of the problem I raised before." So there's your indicator that it's the conclusion. That's actually a conclusion to a much longer argument, which is really, what is the place of wealth getting in household management, in economia, and politics more generally. And so he'll take this first one, this form of wealth getting where you seek to obtain these natural things. That is part of household management. That's great. That's good. That's necessary. grow a vegetable garden, you know, have some cattle and get milk and, you know, beef. Those are good things. They're natural. They're drawing from nature. Um, but once we kind of make this move to trade, or this other form of wealth getting, there's two forms of wealth getting. One where, you know, maybe you're a cattle rancher, but then you use that to sell um, the cattle or the beef or the milk or whatever, to get money in order to get other stuff you need. So that's good. Good, honorable, and necessary, because you need to obtain those things. Whereas commerce is unnatural. So it's a form of wealth getting that, you know, undermines the virtues. It has all of these further consequences, and you just gain from other men. And so you have all of these consequences that he's talking about. And so there's two things that seem to be going on. So there's the unnatural wealth getting, which is sort of a genus, and commerce is a type of that, is a species of that. And then usury is another species. Now, the way that I read Aristotle is, okay, so retail trade or commerce, it's unnatural, it's undermines the polis, it destroys virtue, it's, you know, it's not good. And that's a one sort of thing. And even though you're using money to engage in exchange. But then there's usury, which is even more hated. And the reason, the whole reason of the tokos and things is that usury is almost worse, because in commerce, at least you're using money for exchange. Like, you're still, like, you know, giving people this and that. But usury is even worse, because it doesn't even engage in exchange. And the problem with commerce is that it seeks money for its own sake. And usury is worse because it's like the pure distilled form of that. Like, you're doing nothing but increase. Like, you're not doing anything but requiring someone to give you more money. And so I think that's what he means when he talks about that. Because if you look at the prior chapters, the issue is seeking money for its own sake, and commerce is the sort of principal first way that this arises. And then usury is worse because it does it like to the nth degree. It goes beyond the profit seeking of commerce to not even engage in exchange. You lend to people and then from that money expect them to give you more money. So that's the way I think that Aristotle needs to be read. It's certainly not that, oh, you know, breed of barren metal, that I think, what's his name? Oh, Benjamin. Someone's going to say it and then I'll remember it. But he provided that defense of usury. I can't remember. It's on the tip of my tongue. I can feel it. Anyway, but yeah, it's not. It doesn't have to do with this bare metal. It has to do with making artificial wealth the fundamental wealth. It's that confusion that he draws out, which we suffer from today, and maybe even worse so. So yeah, that's kind of the way that I'm reading it, and I think it's the way you have to read it, because the whole, reading it as, well, he's just misunderstanding everything is just, it doesn't take into account what's really going on. And so, um, and I think a lot of this is what Aquinas integrates into his own thought, and why Usury also has a place not only in the treatise on justice, but in the De Malo has falls under the capital sin of avarice, because it is seeking money for its own sake. And to the, it's like money is the only wealth. Not only is it like the wealth alongside natural wealth, it's like the only wealth. And you can see this like in the caricature of Scrooge, who's just seeking more and more money by lending to people. So that's I think the correct interpretation of Aristotle, or at least closer to the correct. And so, yeah, I think I covered everything I was thinking about. So, the big thing I will come back to, though, is that one of the things to remember is that even in a capitalist society, money is not fertile, and it's often a confusion that people have about this, because Aquinas is even right that you have to engage in certain industry in order to make a profit from money. And the big thing is, I don't know that people always recognize the nature of various investments and things. And it's like there's a certain level of abstraction in finance, which sort of hides what's going on behind the scenes. Because what's going to happen is that you buy a bond, and it's not like your money turns into rabbits and starts reproducing. What you've bought is a property claim against a company, which is really a collection of property. And implied by that property claim is a certain entitlement to various cash flows. Like the company owes you 5% or whatever, and that's really what's going on. It's like the money didn't suddenly become fertile. And even in the Middle Ages, they had profitable contracts, and it's not like that they suddenly money was sterile and then suddenly became fertile. So it's real. A lot of that is equivocation and people just not thinking about things. So what they mean by different words. Because all the profit you can gain from money is through exchange. Like when you have to exchange money to make more money. Like you go out and you buy something and then sell it at a higher price. Well, you engaged in exchange. You go buy some stocks and bonds. Well, you've engaged in exchange, and so forth and so on. So, it's really quite silly to talk about money as fertile or something under the capitalist economies. And there's a lot of there's some fun neo-scholastic literature on this as well, because they're trying to be realists, and so, well, is it fertile? Maybe it's quasi-productive, and there was a interesting one where someone interesting argument that was like, well, it's productive. Money is productive now, and it's truly capital because um, how did it go? Because it can be so easily exchanged for capital, for like machinery and so forth. And then the response was, well, um, is is money explosive now because you can easily exchange it for dynamite? No. I loved reading that passage, but anyway, I digress. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions or comments or anything else, uh, feel free to leave a comment, and I'll reply, and we can continue the conversation. Otherwise, thank you for listening. It's the solemnity of the Immaculate Conception, so have a blessed solemnity, and yeah, have a good day.